Welcome back to Bar Girl Baddies. Today's story comes from a place most of us know too well, that moment when loneliness makes you vulnerable, when grief cracks you open, and when halfway around the world seems like the perfect distance from everything you're running from. This is the story of Pieter, a 32-year-old marketing consultant from Cape Town who thought a few months in Thailand would help him reset after his father's death. He wasn't looking for love. He wasn't looking to be saved. But when Nok walked into that bar in Pattaya with her practiced smile and rehearsed sympathy, she saw what she always saw. Another broken foreigner with money to burn and a heart ready to be played. What she didn't count on was that Pieter had been broken before, and this time he was paying attention. If you've ever fallen for someone who saw you as a transaction, or if you think you're too smart to get scammed, stay with us. This one's going to surprise you. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And if this story sounds familiar, hit that subscribe button, because we're just getting started. My name is Pieter van der Merwe, and I need to tell you about the worst and weirdest 6 weeks of my life. Not because I'm proud of what happened, not because I came out of it a hero, but because I think there's a version of me in a lot of you watching this. And maybe if I'd heard a story like mine before I bought that ticket to Bangkok, things would have gone differently. Or maybe not. Maybe I needed to learn the hard way. Either way, here it is. I grew up in Stellenbosch, wine country, the kind of place where tourists come to drink pinotage and take pictures of mountains. My dad ran a hardware store on the main road, one of those old school places with wooden floors that creaked and smelled like paint, thinner and fertilizer. He was a proper Afrikaner, the kind who fixed everything himself, who thought therapy was for people with too much time on their hands, who showed love by teaching you how to change a tire or negotiate with a supplier who was trying to rip you off. He never said I love you. Not once that I can remember. But when I graduated university with a degree in marketing, he drove 3 hours to Cape Town just to take me to dinner at a steakhouse he couldn't really afford. That was his way. I moved to Cape Town properly after that, got a job at a decent marketing agency in the city centre, worked my way up to consultant by the time I was 28. On paper, I was doing well. I had a flat in Sea Point with a view of the Atlantic, a car I didn't need because I could walk to work, friends from university I still saw for drinks, most Fridays. But somewhere along the way, the whole thing started feeling like a performance. I'd sit in client meetings talking about brand positioning and customer lifetime value, and I'd think, does any of this actually matter? I wasn't depressed, not clinically. I was just empty. Like I was watching my own life happen from a distance. Then my dad got sick. Pancreatic cancer. The kind that moves fast and doesn't give you time to prepare. 1 month he was complaining about back pain. The next month he was in Tygerberg Hospital with a prognosis measured in weeks, not months. I drove up to Stellenbosch every weekend, sat by his bed, watched him shrink inside his own skin. The worst part wasn't the dying. It was the helplessness. My whole life, my dad had been this unstoppable force, fixing problems, building things, making decisions. Now he couldn't even get out of bed to take a piss. He died on a Tuesday morning in March, and I wasn't there. I was stuck in traffic on the N1 because there'd been an accident near Brackenfell. By the time I got to the hospital, he was already gone. The nurse said it was peaceful. I didn't believe her. The funeral was the usual Afrikaans affair church service, too many people I didn't know. A reception at the Dutch Reformed Hall with coexisters and rusks and old women telling me my father was in a better place. I smiled and thanked them and counted the minutes until I could leave. My mom had passed years earlier, and I was an only child, so the estate was straightforward. The hardware store, the house, some savings. I sold the store to a chain that gutted it and turned it into a spa. The house I kept, but I couldn't bring myself to go inside. I hired an estate agent to rent it out and transferred the whole mess into a trust I didn't want to think about. Back in Cape Town, people were kind. Too kind. Co-workers brought me casseroles. I didn't eat. Friends invited me to braise. I didn't attend. My boss gave me 2 weeks compassionate leave and suggested I see a therapist. I nodded and said I'd think about it, but I knew I wouldn't. I didn't need to talk about my feelings. I needed to stop feeling altogether, so I did what any rational person in my position would do. I opened my laptop one night after too many glasses of Merlot and booked a one-way ticket to Bangkok. I told my boss I was taking a sabbatical. I told my friends I needed space. I told myself I'd be gone a month, maybe 2. I didn't tell anyone I had no intention of coming back. I landed at Suvarnabhumi Airport on a Thursday afternoon in late April, and the heat hit me like a wall the second I stepped outside. Cape Town in autumn is mild, jacket weather, cool ocean breeze. Bangkok in April is like standing inside someone's mouth. The air was thick, wet, heavy with exhaust fumes and frying garlic and something sweet I couldn't identify. I took a taxi to Khao San Road because that's where every backpacker goes, checked into a hostel that smelled like mildew and weed, and spent the first 2 days walking around in a daze. I saw temples. I ate pad thai from street vendors. I watched tourists get drunk and dance to techno music at bars that never closed. It all felt loud and chaotic, and exactly the opposite of the quiet grief I'd been drowning in back home. But it didn't feel like an escape. It felt like I'd traded one kind of numbness for another. On the third day, I met an Australian guy at the hostel named Dave, mid-40s, sunburnt, wearing a Chang beer singlet and flip-flops. He asked me where I was headed next, and when I said I didn't know, he laughed and told me I looked like I needed a drink and a beach. He said Bangkok was fine for a couple days, but if I really wanted to switch off, I should head to Pattaya. I'd heard of Pattaya, obviously, everyone has. It's got a reputation, sex tourism, Russian mobsters, old men with young wives. But Dave said it wasn't all like that there were quiet spots if you knew where to look, that the beach was decent and the beer was cheap, and nobody gave a damn who you were or what you were running from. That last part sold me one took a bus the next morning. 2 hours southeast, the landscape flattening out, billboards for condo developments and all-you-can-eat buffets. Pattaya appeared like a smear of concrete and neon along the coast, and my first thought was that I'd made a mistake. It looked exactly like what it was, a city built for tourists who wanted to misbehave. But I'd already paid for a week at a hotel near Soi Buat Khao, so I checked in, dropped my bag, and went for a walk. The beach was disappointing. Greyish sand and murky water, jet skis buzzing up and down the shore. But the side streets had a strange charm. Little family-run restaurants, massage parlours with grandmothers sitting outside on plastic stools, street dogs sleeping in the shade. It felt lived in, real, in a way Khao San Road hadn't. I spent the first few days just existing. I'd wake up late, eat fried rice for breakfast, walk the beach, drink beer at whatever bar was closest. I wasn't trying to meet people, I wasn't trying to have fun, I was just trying to feel less, and Pattaya was good for that. The heat slowed everything down. The beer was cold and cost less than £1 a bottle. The sunsets were the kind of orange-pink that looked fake, like someone had cranked up the saturation in post-production. I started to relax, or at least I thought I did. Then I met Nock. It was a Tuesday night, about a week into my stay. I'd been walking down a side street off Soi Buat Khao, looking for somewhere quiet to eat, when I heard live music coming from a small open-air bar. Not a go-go bar, just a regular joint with plastic chairs and tables, a handful of locals and expats, and a house band playing covers that were 20 years past their sell-by date. I sat down at the bar, ordered a Leo, and that's when I saw her. She was sitting a few stools down, alone, scrolling through her phone with this look of complete disinterest. Most of the other girls in the bar were circulating, smiling, making eye contact with the foreign men, but she wasn't. She looked tired, bored, like she'd rather be anywhere else. I'm not going to lie and say I wasn't attracted to her. She was beautiful in that specific Thai way. Small, delicate features, long black hair tied back in a ponytail, skin the colour of caramel. But what caught me wasn't her looks. It was her posture. She seemed resigned, like she'd already given up on the night. I don't know why that appealed to me. Maybe because I felt the same way. Maybe because everyone else in that bar was trying so hard to sell something, and she wasn't. Our eyes met, and she gave me a small smile. Not the big, performative kind I'd seen from other girls, just a flicker of acknowledgement. I raised my beer and a half toast. She raised hers back. A minute later, she got up and walked over. Her English was good, better than I expected. She asked me the usual questions. Where are you from? How long have you been here? Is this your first time in Thailand? I told her I was from South Africa, that I'd been in the country a couple weeks, that I wasn't sure how long I'd stay. She nodded, like she'd heard it all before. Then she asked why I looked so sad. That caught me off guard. I laughed and said I didn't realise it showed. She shrugged and said everyone who comes to Pattaya is running from something, that it's not exactly a destination for happy people. I asked her what she was running from. She looked at me for a long moment, and I thought she might tell me to mind my own business, but instead she said her life. Just like that. Her life. We talked for hours. She told me her name was Nok, which means bird in Thai. She was from Isan, the rural northeast, a place she described as beautiful and boring in equal measure. She'd come to Pattaya 3 years ago to make money, to send back to her family. Her father had died when she was young, and her mother was getting old, her younger brother still in school. She didn't say outright that she worked in the bars, but it was implied. I didn't ask. It felt rude. She spoke about it all with this quiet exhaustion, like she was reciting facts about someone else's life. When I asked if she liked Pattaya, she laughed and said, "Nobody likes Pattaya, you just survive it." What struck me most was that she didn't ask me for anything. She didn't suggest I buy her out of the bar. She didn't hint at needing money. When the bar started closing down around midnight, she finished her drink, said it was nice to meet me, and walked out. No taxi hustle, no last-minute plea for a ride. She just left. I sat there, confused and slightly disappointed, and finished my beer alone. I went back the next night. I told myself it was because I liked the bar, the music, the vibe. But really, I wanted to see if she'd be there. She was. Same seat, same posture, same phone. When she saw me, she looked genuinely surprised, like she'd already forgotten about me. I bought her a drink, and we talked again. This time, she was a bit more open. She told me about her childhood, growing up in a village with no paved roads, bathing in a river. Her grandmother teaching her how to cook sticky rice in bamboo. She showed me photos on her phone, a small wooden house on stilts, rice fields stretching out to the horizon. An old woman with a wide smile and teeth stained dark red from chewing betel nut. She said that was her grandmother, that she died last year, that Nok still thought about her every day. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? By the end of the second week, we were meeting outside the bar, coffee shops during the day, night markets in the evening, once a temple on the outskirts of the city that she said her grandmother used to take her to when she visited as a kid. She lit incense and prayed, and I stood beside her feeling like an intruder. Afterward, she asked if I believed in anything. I said I used to, that I'd been raised Dutch Reformed, but stopped going to church when I left for university. She nodded and said she understood. She said sometimes she prayed and didn't know if anyone was listening, but it made her feel less alone. I knew exactly what she meant. One evening, we were sitting at a night market eating grilled squid when her phone rang. She answered it, and her whole face changed. She spoke rapidly in Thai, her voice rising, and then she hung up and just sat there, staring at nothing. I asked what was wrong. She hesitated, and then she started crying. Quiet tears, the kind that just spill over without sound. She said it was her brother. He'd been in an accident on his motorbike. Nothing too serious, but he needed surgery on his leg, and the hospital wouldn't do it without money up front. She said her family didn't have it, that her mother was already in debt from her grandmother's funeral, that she didn't know what to do. She apologized for telling me, said she didn't want to burden me with her problems. I told her it was okay. I didn't offer money. Not yet. But I was already thinking about it. That night, lying in my hotel bed, I replayed the conversation in my head. Part of me knew this could be a setup. I'd read enough online forums, enough warnings about bar girls and scams. But another part of me, the part that was still raw from my father's death, the part that desperately wanted to believe I could help someone, that I could matter to someone, that part told me she was different, that Nok was real, that this wasn't a con, it was just life, and life is hard, and sometimes people need help. I wanted to be the person who helped. I wanted to be needed. So I decided I'd give her the money not as a loan, as a gift. And I told myself it had nothing to do with wanting her to stay. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of purpose, something I hadn't felt in months. I went to an ATM, withdrew 20,000 baht, and put it in an envelope. It wasn't a huge amount by my standards, maybe around 10,000 rand, but I knew it would mean something to her. When I met Nok that afternoon at a small cafe near the beach, I slid the envelope across the table and told her it was for her brother's surgery. She opened it, saw the cash, and her eyes went wide. She asked me what I was doing, said she couldn't accept it, that it was too much. I told her it was fine, that I wanted to help, that it was just money and money should be used for things that matter. She started crying again, properly this time, and she reached across the table and held my hand. She said I was the kindest man she'd ever met, that she'd never forget this, that she didn't know how to thank me. I told her she didn't have to. That was the truth. I didn't want thanks. I wanted to feel like I mattered. That night, she stayed over at my apartment for the first time. Nothing happened. Not in the way you might think. We just lay in bed together, her head on my chest, the fan spinning overhead, and she told me stories about growing up in Isan. She described monsoon season, when the roads turned to mud, and her whole village would gather to plant rice. Everyone singing old folk songs her grandmother had taught them. She talked about her brother, how he was smart, how he wanted to study engineering in Bangkok but couldn't afford it. She said, if he got better, if his leg healed properly, maybe he'd have a chance. I stroked her hair and told her everything would be okay. I wanted to believe it as much as she did. The next few weeks felt like something out of a dream, the kind where everything is soft around the edges and nothing bad can touch you. I extended my stay in Pattaya indefinitely. I moved out of the budget hotel and into a serviced apartment near Jomtien Beach, a quieter part of the city where the tourists were older and the bars were fewer. It had a kitchen, a balcony with a partial ocean view, air conditioning that actually worked. Nok started spending most nights there. She'd cook for me, simple dishes like fried rice with crispy pork or papaya salad, so spicy my eyes watered. She'd laugh at my terrible attempts to speak Thai, repeating words slowly like I was a child, her hand on my arm, her smile genuine. We'd ride a rented scooter up into the hills outside the city where the air was cooler, and you could see the whole coastline spread out below, lights twinkling in the dusk. She told me she'd never brought anyone there before, that it was her secret place. I wanted to believe her. Part of me did, but there were cracks. Small ones at first, easy to explain away. She was vague about her schedule. Some nights she'd say she was visiting a friend, and when I'd casually suggest coming along or meeting up later, she'd change the subject or say her friend was going through something private. Her phone buzzed constantly, and she always flipped it face down on the table. When I asked who was texting her, she'd say it was her mother or her friends from work. I didn't push. I told myself it was cultural, that Thai people value privacy differently, that I was being too Western in my expectations of transparency. The money thing started bothering me too. After I'd given her the 20,000 for her brother's surgery, she'd thanked me endlessly for a few days, and then the subject just disappeared. She never mentioned how the surgery went, whether her brother was recovering. Nothing. When I asked, she said everything was fine, that he was doing better, and then she'd kiss me or change the topic. A few weeks later, she brought up her family's finances again. This time, it was her mother. She said the hospital in Udon Thani was demanding payment for some treatments, that they needed 50,000 baht or they'd stop her mother's medication. The number had changed. I noticed that. First, it was 30,000 for her brother, then 20 when I asked again, now 50 for her mother. I told myself it was a language barrier, that she'd been approximating, that medical bills were complicated everywhere. But a small voice in the back of my head, the part of me that used to negotiate contracts and spot inconsistencies in client presentations, that part was starting to pay attention. I met some of her friends one night, a group of girls from the bars who were out celebrating someone's birthday. They were nice enough, friendly, loud, the way people get when they've had a few drinks and don't have to perform for customers. But I could feel their eyes on me, measuring, calculating. One of them, a girl named Ploy with bleached hair and a nose ring, asked me in broken English how long I'd been with Nok. I said a few weeks. She nodded and said something in Thai to the others that made them laugh. It wasn't cruel laughter, more like knowing, like they were in on a joke I wasn't. I asked Nok what Ploy had said. Nok's face darkened and she snapped something at Ploy in Thai, sharp enough that Ploy went quiet and looked away. I asked again what she'd said. Nok told me it was nothing, just a stupid joke about Farangs always falling in love too fast. I laughed it off, but it sat with me. The word Farang, foreigner. That's all I was to them. That's maybe all I was to her. I started drinking more. Not catastrophically, not blackout drunk every night, but more than I had back in Cape Town. A beer with lunch, a few whiskies in the evening, another round before bed. Pattaya made it easy. Alcohol was cheap and everywhere, and nobody judged you for day drinking because half the expats in the city were doing the same thing. I told myself I was on holiday, that I was allowed to unwind, that this was part of the reset I'd come here for. But the truth was, I was just numbing out again, the same way I had after my father's funeral. I wasn't exploring Thailand anymore. I wasn't seeing temples or learning the culture. I was just existing in Nok's orbit, waiting for her to text me, to come over, to make me feel like I mattered. Then came the real ask. It was a Saturday morning. A knock showed up at my apartment earlier than usual, her eyes red like she'd been crying. She sat down on the couch and told me her mother was in the hospital, that it was serious, that the doctors said she needed treatment right away, but the hospital in Udon Thani wouldn't do anything without a deposit. She showed me a photo on her phone, an old woman in a hospital bed, tubes in her nose, eyes closed, machines beeping in the background. My stomach twisted. I'd just watched my own father die like that, hooked up to machines that kept him breathing when his body wanted to give up. The timing felt cruel. It also felt perfect. Too perfect. I pushed the thought away. Nok was sobbing now, saying she didn't know what to do, that her family had no money, that if her mother died, it would be her fault because she hadn't sent enough home, because she'd been selfish, because she was a bad daughter. I held her and told her it would be okay. I asked how much she needed. She said, 60,000 baht. I didn't even hesitate. I went to the ATM that afternoon, withdrew the cash in 2 transactions, and gave it to her in an envelope. She cried and told me I'd saved her mother's life, that she'd never forget this, that I was the best thing that had ever happened to her. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. 2 days later, I saw her at Central Festival, the big shopping mall near Beach Road. I'd gone to buy a new pair of sandals because mine had broken, and I was walking past the Apple store when I saw her through the window. She was at the counter, smiling, holding a brand new iPhone in a sleek white box. The salesperson was setting it up for her. She looked happy, genuinely happy. The kind of happiness I hadn't seen on her face in weeks. I stood there frozen, watching through the glass. She didn't see me. She was too focused on the phone, scrolling through it, laughing at something the salesperson said. I felt sick. 60,000 baht. That's what the new iPhone cost. Maybe a bit more. The same amount I'd given her for her mother's emergency hospital treatment 2 days ago. I walked away before she saw me. I went back to my apartment and sat on the balcony and tried to make sense of it. Maybe a friend had given her the phone. Maybe she'd been saving up for it separately. Maybe her mother's treatment had cost less than expected and she'd used the leftover money, and that was okay, wasn't it? She deserved nice things. She worked hard. She sent money to her family. Why shouldn't she buy herself something? But even as I tried to justify it, I knew. Deep down, I knew. The hospital photo, the tears, the perfectly timed crisis right when I was most vulnerable. It was a script. A performance. And I'd bought a front row ticket. I didn't confront her. Not right away. When she came over that evening, she didn't mention the phone. She cooked dinner. We watched a movie on Netflix. She fell asleep, curled up against me on the couch. I stroked her hair and looked at her face, peaceful in sleep. And I tried to reconcile the girl I thought I knew with the girl who'd just scammed me out of 2 months' rent. I wanted to wake her up and demand the truth. I wanted to scream at her, to throw her out, to feel something other than this hollow ache in my chest. But I didn't. I just sat there, the TV screen glowing in the dark, and accepted what I'd known for weeks but refused to admit. This wasn't love. This wasn't even close. This was a transaction, and I was the one who'd agreed to the terms. The breaking point came a week later. I decided to surprise her. She'd been distant, making excuses about why she couldn't meet up, saying she had to help a friend or visit family or some vague obligation that didn't quite add up. I thought if I showed up at her apartment, the place she'd always made excuses about me visiting, maybe I could prove to myself that I was wrong, that there was a reasonable explanation for everything. I'd only been there once before, briefly, to drop her off after a night out. She told me the building was old, that she was embarrassed about how small her room was, that she didn't like having guests. But I'd looked up the address later, curious, and the building wasn't in some run-down part of town. It was near Theprasit Road, a decent area, newer construction. I showed up on a Wednesday afternoon, around 2 o'clock, when I knew she wouldn't be expecting me. The building was nicer than she'd described. Tiled lobby, a bored security guard scrolling his phone, air-conditioned hallways. I climbed to the 3rd floor and found her door. Number 304. I could hear voices inside, a man's voice, laughter. I knocked. The voices stopped. Footsteps. The door opened. A man stood there. Mid-40s, tie, soft around the middle, wearing boxer shorts and a sleeveless undershirt, holding a bottle of Singha beer. He looked at me, annoyed, and said something in Thai. I froze. Then Nok appeared behind him, her face completely blank, Not shocked, not guilty, not even surprised. Just tired. Like she'd been caught before and knew exactly how this scene would play out. She said my name. Peter. Flat. Emotionless. The man looked between us and asked her something in Thai. She answered without looking at me. He laughed, a short bark of amusement, and said something else. She nodded. He took a swig of his beer and walked back inside, leaving the door open. Nock stood there in the doorway, wearing an oversized t-shirt and shorts, her hair messy, her arms crossed. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She just looked at me with this expression that said, "What did you expect?" I wanted to say something. I wanted to ask who he was, how long this had been going on, whether anything between us had been real. But the words wouldn't come. My throat felt tight, my chest hollow. I just turned and walked away. I heard the door close behind me. She didn't call after me. She didn't chase me down the hallway. She just let me go. I went back to my apartment, packed my things, and booked a flight to Cape Town, leaving the next morning. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the balcony drinking whiskey and watching the lights of Pattaya shimmer in the heat, thinking about my father, about the hardware store, about how he'd taught me to spot when someone was trying to sell you garbage and call it gold. He would have seen through Nock in 5 minutes, but I hadn't wanted to see through her. I'd wanted to be saved. I'd wanted to matter. And that desperation had made me blind. But before I left, I did something Nock wouldn't expect. I'd been documenting everything, not because I planned to use it, but because I'm methodical that way. Screenshots of our chats, photos of the wire transfer receipts, a recording I'd made one night when she was telling me about her mother's illness in detail. I hadn't done it to trap her. I'd done it because some part of me, the marketing consultant who built campaigns and tracked metrics, wanted evidence that this had been real. Now I had evidence of something else. I created a simple post, her photo, one she'd sent me herself, the name of the bar where we'd met, a timeline of her requests and my payments, the hospital photo she'd shown me, and the date I'd seen her buying me iPhone. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't call her names. I just laid out the facts the way I would in a client presentation. Then I posted it to 3 places: an expat forum for Pattaya, a Thailand travel Facebook group, and a scam awareness page I'd found months ago when I'd first researched the city. I wrote one line at the bottom. Her name is Nock. She works the bars on Soi Buakau. She's very good at what she does. Be smarter than I was. I hit post and closed my laptop. The next morning, I flew home.